Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Face to Face. My name is Godfred Akoto Boafo. My guest today is a serial entrepreneur, sports administrator, change maker, all-around kind of guy who is very, very popular with a lot of Ghanaians. Herbert Mensah is our guest on Face to Face today. Yes. I'm interested in the cellular business though.
If you go back, if I take the story back and you say, look, once upon a time, a child was born in a little town called Kumo. And people find it difficult to understand that I was born in a village. So I was born on the 26th of December, the day after Christmas. And as I was born the day after Christmas, my father's next door neighbor was the late Kroba Eduse.
Oh.
Which is why I'm called Kwejo Eduse. Contrary to people call me Kwabna Herbert Amponsa Mensah, I'm Kwejo Eduse. The only sibling that was born in the building. When we look at our characters, they're genetics. So I'm born of my father and my mother. My father is arguably within the top 5 most successful businessmen, industrialists in Ghanaian history.
That was big pressure though, being born to
Not at all, because being rebellious from birth, I was brought up by my mother, not by my father. And that's what a lot of people don't realize either. My mother, and that's why womanhood is so important to me. I have 4 daughters who, if you ever get the chance to meet them, are extraordinary women. They're brought up, especially the elder 2, who have grown up with me. The younger 2, as you know, I'm in temporary, I wouldn't say conflict, but the issue of the right to bring up a child the way you want to as a hands-on father. I change diapers, I feed the kids, I read, I do homework with the kids. I'm very much into bringing up children to understand the core values, the values being do unto others as you would they don't do unto yourself, which is my religion. Understanding that humility, respect, but don't suffer fools, which happens to be myself. And to prepare your children for your death as they are born. And the problem with middle-class Ghana is you don't do that. So when it is that rich people die or well-to-do people die, they leave behind a whole bunch of brats who think that they are their parents who they are not. So mine are born out of massive humility, and you are preparing them for a life where you would not be. And I owe that to my mother. Abna Pomeso. I don't owe it to my father. I owe part of my genes to my father, perhaps the ability to work, create, and do things in a slightly different way. But my mother was also a successful business person. But her suffering, as most African women tend to within a marriage situation, is what built strength and gave me a sense of greater humility, but also a sense not to take any nonsense. Because having come from that, by the age of 5, 6, I was out of the country. And I lived with Europeans. I didn't live with Ghanaians. You'll have to ask my parents why that is. So my culture in terms of Ghana suddenly cut off for the next 7, 8 years until I came back, and my mother then put me into school here for 3 years before leaving again. But
that's Achimota School?
That's right, from 2 to from 5.
Did you enjoy yourself there?
Coming
from where you were coming
from? No, yes. You see, because I have a clear philosophy that people have not understood, and if they understood, then they understand me a little bit. That's, firstly, I have no expectation of anything.
Even at that age?
Never have. It came from probably the hardships, the way my father treated me and some of my siblings. So
convince my viewers though, you were born to one of the richest men in the country. And you're talking about having no expectations.
Yeah, because I was then brought up by my mother, who had been divorced from my father. So I did not live in the opulence of my siblings. I lived with my mother in Kanda, near Kanda Nima, and then in Okaishi. Before Okaishi was developed, I grew up in Okaishi with my cousin, who is, I view my brother, Professor Nyaku, one of Ghana's most eminent economists. But again, we don't deal with our own. He's the senior provost at New York University. He's the advisor to the Ministry of Trade and Economic Planning in Abu Dhabi. He set up a campus here. He's developing things back in Ashanti. He has advised on previous occasion the president of Argentina, minister for planning in South Africa. So supreme brain. His father died in a car crash, my cousin from my mother's side. And we lived there in Okaishi together. So, and Okaishi, not that we went to work there, we actually lived there. So that's who brought me up. And then sent me back to the UK to be educated. My mother again, not my father. And in the UK, I lived in Hackney, Dalston Green, Bow, Bethnal Green. So those who know London before Canary Wharf, that was the poorer part of London. And that was my upbringing. I went to private school, but a poorer private school, not a richer private school. So you're grounded in that way. And if you've grown up in Okaishi and in the places I've spoken about, then you don't suffer fools. I grew up with Nigerians. You don't suffer fools. I grew up in the East End of London. You know, say what is on your mind, and which is how a lot of people get intimidated by my presence. Because if you talk nonsense, I will deal with you. It doesn't matter whether you're a president or whether you're a person on the street. Perhaps the only exception to that would be Otumfo, who I have massive respect and has been a father figure to me.
You talk about the upbringing you had and how your mother brought you up, a successful businesswoman in her own right. Where did your entrepreneurial spirit, when did it really emerge? Because you could have done so many things, but you decided to become a businessman and you liked trying different things.
I think from a desire to be independent. I believe in independence. I speak about my 4 daughters. I'm bringing them up to be independent. Men are not as important as society here says they are. Your independence is more important than that of being in a relationship or a marriage. And then if you do get into that situation, it should be one that the equity is based upon your independence, not because of your physical form or who your family is or which church you attend or whatever else. Independence, true independence, independence of thought, of word, of how you operate is absolute key. So for me, from the age of 12, 13, it was fundamental to me that I had to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. And looking ahead at older people, I didn't see why I should be a certain age in order to achieve, which meant that by the time I was in 6th form, I was doing business in the UK. By the time I'd left 6th form, I was already trying my luck at forms of legitimate business.
Were you succeeding?
Yep. I made my first 7-figure sum at the age of 21. I lost it by 23 because I was young and incredibly stupid. You are into fast cars, this, that, and everything else, and there's more to life than that. By 25, I'd made it back again. You swing and you move, but materialism has never been important. So for those who work with me, they see me, I come to office with a t-shirt and track downs. You wear a suit when you're going to lie, or you've got another...
Well, talk to me about how you got into the cellular industry, because you got into it at a time. It's rare to find an African businessman or a Ghanaian businessman for that point who identifies a significant problem and also is able to identify that in the next 15, 20 years, this is what will drive a country. You started moving mobile handsets when nobody was thinking about this. And at a point outside of people in South Africa, nobody was doing this better than you.
Well, at one point I was the 7th largest in the world, so bigger than anybody in Africa as a mobile cellular operator. I looked at life in Africa, which I looked at as the way forward rather than through Europe. You have a number of choices, and it still exists many ways today. If you want to become a big deal here, you need to deal with government or you get a license. So the cellular operators were in bed with some president or other. In the 10 days of Millicom, the local shareholder was very close to President Rawlings. That's the only reason. That is the only reason why he got the license. And other dealers and the rest of them exactly the same. I have 2 choices. Either I can go and become a government type of person, which is not possible for me because I have an opinion. And the opinion is something that must be voiced. Do we have leaders who are really in a position to listen to opinions, take opinions, be strong about opinions, and not offended by other people's opinions? Not often. Perhaps now we do, but I'm not necessarily in the past. So the other option is then to look and see what you get off the back of that. And one thing was to now say, can you be a supplier? But the big manufacturers don't want to deal with the little man here in Ghana. So how do you manage logistics? After all, the biggest business in the world is logistics. I don't view that I was dealing with selling telephones. I was moving a product. Can you move a product? Timing, opportunity, angle. That's the clear issue of how to operate in any business. And showing them, Motorola at the time, that I was in a position or capable of doing it on a very small scale, led to myself being able to move out of the Ghana issue and being looked at in the bigger African issue until we were dealing on a much bigger scale. Motorola never understood that there would be a movement from e-tax to GSM. And so they started dying by the way, and we moved quickly across to GSM with Ericsson, and which is a beautiful company to work with, but does not have the global sales reach of Nokia. And so managed to then get Nokia dealership and become big enough to do over 100 million euros a year in terms of Nokia business. And then again, they did not realize that smartphones would come into the market. So you've really got to have a look at and see where you go in terms of those growth markets, and then see where the opportunities are and where the limitations are as well. And I think that we are in a very small setup here in Ghana in terms of the numbers of people and where you could go and what you're trying to do. And so for me, it was obvious then to grow, to try and deal elsewhere, to have extensions into Nigeria, into South Africa. And even though you're African dealers, we were in a position to now have outreach to Hong Kong and into China. In the days of Motorola, with the LED Motorola flip phone, I think we were the biggest dealers in the world, and the market was China, not into Africa. So you've got to look at all of these things and then see where the opportunities are, how you want to position yourself. Do you want to be the guy who arrives in a Rolls Royce and makes a lot of noise? For me, it makes no sense. We have a lot of people here in Bentleys and Rolls Royces, which makes, to me, that's just my philosophy, makes no sense.
But whilst you were doing that, you somehow also found a way into the media landscape at that point. You were doing BBC, you were doing all kinds of things. How were you combining the two, focusing on building your logistics business, as you call it, and also basically the startings of a little media empire at that point?
Well, I don't know. For me, Ghana was a halfway house, and in many ways it still is. We haven't evolved to the point where true talent is allowed to grow. People get frightened by their own shadows and by ghosts that other people have seen that you never will, and that is Ghana. So I've always looked at core business one side, and then you look at where you go elsewhere. And yes, you are right, I represented the BBC and a number of others. I did invest soft loan issues into a number of media houses here in Ghana, which luckily has remained undisclosed over a period, but enough to give one influence. And then again, you try and step ahead. You are in the media, obviously. I started a radio station that nobody understood what we were doing. But the concept simply was that it's not a radio station, it's a vehicle. And therefore, it made no sense to me to say, how are you going to compete with City or with Joy and put in a news team and put in a sports setup? They said, but you're sports, why don't you talk about it? And I said, no. What you need to do is embrace current future. And the current future at the time was social media, which we were the biggest. When we got involved in X products, we were the biggest. Eventually with X Live, we had 1.5 million likes on X Live. So by the time we sold the structure, as I put it, we had over 1.5. The strength of it was in understanding that you had a market that other people would look, as opposed to looking at advertising revenue as the basis for setting up the radio station. So it's always about how do you think out of the box and be different to everybody else. And in the context of where we are here, people get frightened. So if you take Kotoko, think out of the box.
Okay.
You take over the club. At one point, they were getting 58 CDs a game. Stadiums were completely empty. Not one player played in the national team. Not one player in under 17, under 20, under 23, in any national team. They couldn't field 11 players. I know people have short memories, but they couldn't field 11 players to play in the league. That's how we got involved in Kotoko. And then you say, well, why you? Because you're not a footballer. You know, my sporting life is about playing rugby, which I played at a very high level. I played one international in Zimbabwe and provincial rugby in Zimbabwe, in the UK, all over the place. Athletics, boxing when I was young. But the formula to everything is pretty much the same. So if you're prepared to put a structure in place, that makes it work. Now, do you do what was being done, which was wrong? Or do you do something different? Stadium's empty, not attractive on the pitch, no players, future dim, or do you do something different? And we decided to do something different and to put a program in place, of which it is we put and publicize a 10-year program. So you're running it like a business. Consolidate, arrest the situation, break it down, which is what I did when I became chairman of Kotoko. And Otumfuo Pokuari asked me, what will you do with my team? And I said, we need to break it down.
How did you meet him, though?
Interesting, because I had come to... Kotoko was clearly on the way down. And people were looking for different people, not necessarily for me. They were looking for somebody to take it. They couldn't get anybody. Nobody was coming forward. And one day I was invited by Nana Champehene to come to Kumasi. He had wanted me to get involved in things, which I didn't really want to get involved in things. And I had received a call from his father out of the blue the Christmas before I got involved, which is an extraordinary phone call, because I'm sitting in Hadley Wood in the UK where I was living Christmas doing what I love doing, which is cooking, which is my main, one of my 3-4 eccentric hobbies.
I hear you make a mean barbecue.
Oh, I cook. If you had more time, I'd cook for you today. I go to the market, I shop, I select the vegetables, I select the herbs, the spices. And Christmas is a time where I make sure that it's a big feast time. And I think it was 27th or so, day after my birthday, the phone rings and my wife says, I hear her say, hello. And they said, this, Nana, can I speak to Herbert? And my wife says, Nana who? Then she says, Otumfuo. Now, we don't have any relationship with Menshia, so it was a very peculiar thing. But at least my wife is a lot smarter than I am, and is also more Ghanaian than I am. So she takes the phone and shoves it in my face and puts her finger. Before you start doing that thing you do. So it's Nana, and he says, I'd like you to come back and help run my team. My team is dying. And I said, of course, Nana. Not being a traditionalist, I didn't really understand what I was going in anyway. And when he finished, I went back to cooking and forgot about it. But I then went to South Africa. A gentleman here, Walter Spesito, who used to run a Kosovo Textile, wonderful old man. He is now anyway. Called me and said his friend was Sepp Blatter. And Sepp Blatter has great plans for Africa. And is there any way of getting Sepp Blatter onto Supersport, to really do an interview that would go across Africa? And I spoke and I said, look, Walter, is he a good guy? And he said, yeah, he's got great intentions for Africa. So I spoke to Gary Bailey at Supersport, and I said, look, this is the gig. Can we have? And he says, absolutely, bring him down if he's prepared to come. I said, no, he's going to be there anyway. And so I flew to South Africa, and behind the scenes was somehow involved. He did the interview, it was great. Everything he said he was going to do for Africa. We'd have another a World Cup in Africa, which I guess we did in South Africa, and so on and so forth. And then my friends in football were there, a guy called Ray Whelan, who was involved with the English setup. And I said, oh, I'm going back to London. And he said, yeah. And then another guy turned around, I think Mr. Lane, oh, I hear that you might be going to run one of the great African football giants, which is sleeping now. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, oh, Kotoko. And I said, Yeah, it was going, but I'm not going to do it. And Whelan said, don't be silly, come on. Let's go have a look at Ghana. And I said no. But eventually we got on a plane. Me and him, we came to Ghana. I called Godfred Akoto, who's now the head of SWAG, who was passionate that I should get involved in Kumasi Asante Kotoko. And Kwabena said, let's go to Kumasi and have a look. So Ray said, come. So we drove, and I remember we drove leisurely to Kumasi, doing the thing I like doing. We stop on the road, you buy some fruit. The white boys get a kick out of it, and we arrive in Kumasi. In Koko was very quiet. People were coming and saying, because I think Kwabena Akoto had started saying, this guy coming, he done Max Brito, he done this. By the time we reached Konongo, everyone was looking at the vehicle, and since I'm not really part of the system, it was weird. Kumasi the same. Then we went to the training ground, which was just a joke. I mean, there was, on a laterite pitch, there were 2 balls, there was Dogomoro, Ebo Men, somebody else, not enough players, totally uncoordinated. And I looked at this thing and I just said, look, everything in the world is about structure. This is not serious. Then Kwabena said, we needed to go to Malaysia to go and see somebody. So we went there, and we were not allowed to enter.
The palace?
Yes, they said we had no appointment.
I'll let you tell me how you got into the palace in a bit. We'll return with our conversation with Herbert Mensah when Face to Face returns.
Every weekday at 8 p.m., City Newsroom brings you analysis of the major news stories of the day. In-depth, comprehensive, and researched. It's 1 hour of local and international news from 8 to 9 p.m. It's the City Newsroom. Weekdays on City TV.
Welcome back to Face to Face. So you took over the team?
Not at that point. We went to Palace. They said we couldn't enter, so we left. And I still remember Kwabena Akoto crying in the back of the car because he loves Kotoko. Oh. And he thought it was not going to happen. He thought it was another source of leadership into the club and investment. And I remember laughing and thinking, I dodged a bullet. I just thought to myself, I've dodged a bullet. I have a view on Ghana, beautiful place. I love Kumasi. I think it's wonderful. But having seen international tobacco seized by government, seeing the effect on my siblings, even though they were with my father, I was not, I just did not look at it as a place to invest time and effort beyond the point. When I reached Accra, just as I was reaching Accra, I received a call from my mother, raining insults all over me, and I'm kind of used to it because Herbert is a troublesome boy, and asking me what nonsense had I done. And I said, look, Mom, what are you talking about? He said, you're in Kumasi, what nonsense has gone on? And I said, I've done nothing. He says, you have. And she was so annoyed, she just said, switch on the television, and she slammed the phone. And that's why people should go into records to see actually what happened. Because as I switched on GBC, at the time, I think it was only GBC, there were riots in Kumasi, and that's what people have forgotten. People attacked Menchia, thousands and thousands of people. Water cannon were called, and they were spraying the people. The Sanahene took his gun, and 11 people were shot. That's what people seem to have forgotten. This is history, it's record. 11 people were shot. Water cannon had to disperse the people. The crowds believed that a possible savior for their football club had come and had been rejected. And they had had enough. So they charged the gates of Menchia. The police were called in, water cannon all over the place, and 11 people were feared dead. In the end, nobody died, but there were very serious injuries amongst the 11 who had been shot with old-style guns. So I'm sitting in Accra and I'm thinking, what's this all about? Suddenly my phone is ringing and it's going crazy. So I thought, whoa. So I remember calling Nana Champenhene's wife Tina. And I said, oh, Tina, it's Herbert. And she says, oh, and she was in tears. It was terrible. And I said, oh, this football thing clearly is not for me. And she said, look, maybe you spent your time abroad, but you need to go to Kumasi and see my husband, Nana Champagne. You need to talk to him. You can't just, with what has happened. So I said, okay. So I thought to myself, I'll go the following day. So I went the following day by myself. Yeah. I didn't go with anybody. I planned it as a day trip. I remember taking some money, and I thought that would, at least, if something has happened in any way and I'm involved, that I don't know I'm involved, there's money. When I reached Kumasi, again, deathly quiet. Then I was told that Nana Champagne was at the House of Chiefs. So I drove towards the House of Chiefs. There was a massive crowd outside the House of Chiefs. So spilling onto the road and everything. So I went around the back. And apparently he was inside with a lot of the chiefs. I found an entrance at the back and was waiting at the back behind the curtain as he spoke about what his father had asked him to do for Kotoko, and there would be a solution, and they were talking. And global meals at the back every so often, and it's a big place, the House of Chiefs, trying to draw attention, which was probably my mistake. Because after about 20 minutes, he saw me. And he just announced to the crowd that today, I have been asked by my father to announce that the new chairman of Kumasi Asante Kotoko is Abrantia Herbert Mensah. And then the whole place went into hysterics. And that's how I became the chairman. The crowd outside stormed the House of Chiefs. They picked me up with some difficulty because I'm over 120 kilos. And then marched me down, throwing powder on me and all incense and all kinds of things. And I was frog marched and carried to main Menchia and put in a room. I had powder all over me. I remember calling my associates in Accra to say, hell's broken loose. And they're asking me why. And I said, this is what happened. And they were all laughing. They thought it was a joke. I said, it's not a joke. What are we going to do? So again, I'm thinking about an escape route. How can I pacify this? And with the crowds making noise outside. So I said, ask somebody to send some more money, because I thought money was the solution here. And I could then leave this back into the world that I've set up for myself. Nobody knows who you are. They see you a little bit. You do whatever you have to do. And then suddenly I was taken out of the room and told to come into another room. And when I entered the room, Otumfo Pokowari was sitting there in full splendor, branched by, I think, 11 senior chiefs, either side of him, 5 or 6 or something like that. And Otumfo called me and he says, Herbert, come and sit next to me here. So I came and sat next to him here. And he said to them that today he would speak, not through any Chami. He would speak. Now this was captured. The TV cameras were there, so it was on GBC. The newspapers were there, graphic. I haven't got records of it since, but it's there in the archives. And then he started speaking. He said, this young man, his father is my friend, so therefore he's my son. So today I am going to speak to him. And Otumfo then started speaking about how Kotoko had gone down. Kotoko was his club, and he's giving me Kotoko, suspending the constitution, dissolving the board, and giving me Kotoko for as long as I wished. And I should fix his club for him. So now this is not scripted. And then he asked me, what are you going to do? And so I just said, no, we'll have to break down your club even more and build it up so it has permanence. And he said, fine. And then the great man got up, the chiefs left, and I was the new chairman of Kumasi Asante Kotoko.
And it's a job that you did and did well until
I was fired. Everybody gets fired.
Not even. I don't want to get to the firing part yet. I want to talk about May 9th. It's a day you don't wish on anybody. It happened, and 18 years down the road, you seem to be perhaps one of the very few people who even thinks about May 9th. Does the pain lessen for you after these 18 years?
You know, in life there are many things that define you. My relationship with my father has defined who I am. The relationship with my mother has defined who I am. And May 9th certainly is another defining factor. Because when you have a tragedy of any nature, and one of that nature of which you are at the helm of affairs, not because I was chairman of Kumasi Asante Kotoko, but because after the incident occurred, I was called by supporters, because when you're sitting, and I think it's perhaps symptomatic of the problems in this country, because when you sit in the VIP box, you never understand the pain of anybody, do you? So the match had finished and we were about to leave. You saw police firing tear gas indiscriminately. And important people, I guess, are told they should go inside. And I'm sitting there because the events of the night made little sense to me. And supporters came running up and then shouting down to me, Chairman, come. People are dying. Please, Chairman, come. And if there's trouble, I go to trouble. I'm not somebody who goes away from trouble. So I ran from VIP, went down, and I said, I thought there was a fight. And I thought my presence might make people stop. So I ran, and there were gates, and you couldn't get through gates. And then they said I heard wailing and shouting and horrific sounds. And one of the guys with me was pulling me, and then I realized that people were going, but I didn't know what was going on. So we ran to the back, and I realized that the gate was locked. And it was literally people like spaghetti. So clearly, the tear gas had forced people down the stairwell. Some had fallen off the stairwell to great height and smashed to the ground. Others had reached the bottom, escaping the tear gas. Couldn't get out of the gate, were now trying to get out, and others trying to get in. So most people who died of asphyxiation. That's what they died of. There was nobody there. Police not there. Red Cross, everybody'd run away. And trying to pull the gate not opening, I then run back with the guy screaming at people, come, up the steps, to the top, run 30 meters or whatever it is, and just looked to the top there and saw bodies entangled. So people were crying, and I was shouting at people to stop crying and come and help, and literally just went, pick the first body, fireman's lift over the shoulder, run down, put the body down, run back up. How we did it, I don't know. Picking up bodies, some were alive saying, Chairman, we're alive, leave us. Others were lifeless, picking them up, back to the top, back down, putting them on the ground, and then other people started getting involved, crying with tears in their eyes, no security forces. And then at a point I remember stopping and calling Jacob Echere Lamte, who I think was chief of staff in those days, and telling him that people were dying and he needed to send people here. My mind was rushing. If there was a unit, 64th Battalion, it was not a fighting unit, it was also a recovery unit then. They needed to be there with helicopters, and people with metal breakers, and ambulances needed to be there. People started putting bodies into pickups and taking the bodies away. So that was horrific. And then at a point in time, I jumped into my car and I came back to my offices in Osu. I remember my shirt was full of blood and mud. And then Komla Dumo, I remember, came to me. Komla was like a son to me. And he came, he said, Chairman, you can't stop. His brother Koshi was working at 37. He said, come, people are calling for you at 37. Come now. So I sat in Komla's car, he drove me to 37. And I got out of the car, walked into the hospital. And then you realize how irrelevant you are, because there were people badly injured, who were calling out to me, saying they are sorry, telling me, Chairman, don't worry. Chairman, it will be okay. Chairman, we're sorry. And I'm thinking, you're hurt. You have the right of rage. And you're worried about me. What is that all about? So that's life-changing. Koshi then took us into the wound. I'm sure it was Koshi, and I apologize if it's not. Took us into the morgue. And there were 96 bodies laid down. The rest were at Ridge. It was pathetic because a lifeless body could be asleep. And they were all stripped down, I guess, for identification, into their underclothes. And I always mention this in interviews because you could see the poverty of the people by what they wore. There was one with, calico type of sack and underwear, dead, young, old, dead. And I left there, not the hospital. I just went out and I spoke with Otumfo Setutu, who asked me what was going on, asked me about his people, asked me what was being done, and asked me if I was okay. He cared enough to do that. I looked at politicians running around, and I was filled with a sense of disdain because the situation needn't have happened.
I want to ask you this. You lived in the UK. Did you feel that May 9th and the Okujeto Commission report presented an opportunity like what the Lord Peter Taylor Commission did for English football? Perhaps Ghana had an opportunity to do that with that commission, because for observers they say, yes, 18 years down the road, that commission might as well not have achieved anything.
Well, Uncle Sam is an extraordinary gentleman, but I guess this is the reason why I'm not a politician, because if I was a politician, I would be one that was certainly a lot more draconian. I have always believed that people must take responsibility for their actions. And it's not the little people, it's the big people. I mean, Hillsborough, I see that the chief superintendent is being prosecuted all these years on. And the people who were involved in that have had to pay the price. And I think that, personally, I would have done that here. I think that the people who are responsible at the highest levels, in any other country, the Minister of State would have resigned, the Minister of Sport would have resigned, the Minister of Interior would have resigned, there would have been prosecutions for the people who were involved directly, police commissioners and the rest would have lost their positions, members of national security would also have lost their positions. And it would have set out a mark. You would have then had a look at the way that we run football, because we don't really have proper administrators in Ghana, which is why we're in a mess. We have somebody who can get up there and either talk the most, spend the most money, but administration of sports is like the administration of a country. You really need to understand that the issue of compliance is the basis for integrity and transparency. Without it, you have nothing. So why do we wait for a Kwesi Nyantakyi issue for people to start jumping up and down? Kwesi is not the problem. The problem has been there since. And there was an opportunity to actually clean it out completely so that we don't end up in the current farcical situation of a normalization committee that is failing everybody and has resulted in a total disinterest in football in Ghana. We, as a people, tend to deal with problems as have happened here, rather than deal with the structural problems. If you deal with the structural problems, you don't have a problem. Structure is then backed by institutions. Institutions prosecute, encourage, reward. But if you don't, and you want to deal with the here and now every time something goes wrong, you will never develop. Which is why we have sports in general, whether it's football, whether it's rugby. And I guess when it is that you've had May 9th and we don't stop and have a minute's silence in football games since it occurred, where we have a foundation that is disconnected from the suffering and the pain of the people, when there is no way forward, and perhaps why for 18 years, when we engaged in May 9th, the only two politicians who've joined us, I think it was in the third year, I did not attend that walk, I was outside, but Osafo attended that walk. And many years later, Napo, as we go through his constituency, attended on 2 years. And I guess before he became a big man, he was still a little bit more involved in the process. But Otumfuo always has been. You know, 3 years ago, we went there and he broke his own event, which was honoring his mother. And we went there with the May 9th victims, not all, we always take handfuls. And he had time to shake their hands, to embrace them, to talk to them, to encourage them. Just the other day, actually, we decided to start our pre-celebrations of May 9th at the weekend, rather than disrupt work. You know, in Europe, if it's May Day, you celebrate it on the following Monday, so that you don't disturb the work cycle, unlike here. So we did that. We had a walk with about 15,000 people this year, absolutely massive. And after the event, we then went with a selection of people to Menchia, and we again sat with Otumfuo in private for about 30 minutes, and then he came out and took pictures. No other chief there, just himself. Took pictures, celebrated, held a baby in his hands, and you need to see those pictures, and bless the child, not for publicity. And he has done it every single year. It's just a shame that other politicians have not recognized, as they have in the UK with Hillsborough, as we have with the highest file, as we've done with in South Africa with the Ellis Park disaster, to actually give respect to those who lost their lives.
Is the aftermath of May 9th the reason why you seem to have lost appetite for football and the streets? There's been a clamor, and it's almost yearly. Every time there's a problem in Ghana football, journalists make the phone call to your phone. Herbert, are you interested in the GFA job? I'm sure it happened during the normalization problems. But you seem to have lost appetite.
You know something? People like me never lose appetite. We have a burning desire to change this country. We have a burning desire to contribute to this country. The problem is that where there are areas for possible change, football, business, the economy, there's invariably a cabal, a mafia, a group of people who don't want to let good in. We are in a country where it's not right versus wrong, it's good versus evil. You know, and that's why when things go wrong, you have one group of people thinking, let's talk, let's explain. I always sit back and I laugh, because the agenda of the people of the wrongdoers is not right versus wrong, it's good versus evil. They need to be in that seat. They need to be in control so they can perpetuate the things that have happened before. We haven't reached the point of the Old Testament. We haven't reached the point where people who take higher office are forced to resign, are prosecuted, are criminalized, are dealt with. So next time you take public office, you know the consequences are not a slap on your wrist and you keep the loot. You know, a slap on the wrist, jail time, and you forfeit all monies and expenditure that you've made beforehand. You know, if we get into a position today that you take people involved in politics, people who are involved in sports, and we actually have them declare their assets, have it audited externally, then see who actually has money at the end of it. People will stop looking at politics or football, running football, as a business. There'll be people who are actually getting involved because they understand that there is a need to serve and there's a need to change. And until you get that, nothing's going to change at all.
So Herbert, you talk about Komla Duma.
Yes.
You refer to him in terms like he was my son. How have you been since he left?
Well, I think Komla is an extraordinary human being. I think it's the ultimate test in faith when somebody so young is on the up. His struggles, his battles, which are well known in terms of trying to develop himself. A guy who was in medical school and chose a different option, who did traffic watch and then became, for real, was not really a journalist but became the most significant journalist of his time, who was desperate for change. He was more about respect, and he got upset about being disrespected as opposed to give me this much money at the end of the day. And he had his turmoils, like we all do. But his heart and soul was in the right place. And I think Ghana is such a worse off place without him, because he had a standard. He might not have been a journalist, he might not have been the best journalist out there, but he carried the mantle of journalism to the point where it gave credibility in the eyes of the people. We suffer in the country today because very few people trust politicians, journalists, law enforcement. There's serious confidence issues, and you can pluck one or two and say, oh, he's a good guy. He stands for what is right. But by and large, they don't. And Komla, I think, flew a flag in that direction. I wouldn't say for Joy, I say for Ghana, for journalists in general. And we saw it at his funeral at St. Martin's in the Field, the people who attended. People who flew in from New Zealand and from all around the world, and they would come and they say, well, Komla spoke about you, you were his big brother, you were, the person he could rely on, he told us this. And the things I didn't know, that he confided in people, and, they came forward. And even today, people are still coming forward and talking about his dreams, his wishes, his fears, and I think that is something that at that age, we really, really have lost somebody quite special.
When we return from our final break, I'll be talking to Herbert about rugby and how he intends to put Ghana on the world map.
For regular news checks as they unfold, 2020 news, all day, all the time. Politics, sports, entertainment, business, and more. 2020 news. We bring you the world in 20 minutes.
Welcome back to Face to Face. Let's talk a bit about rugby. Your love for rugby started when you were in the UK. I'm told you played at the university. You did a bit of Saracens as well. How did you fare at Saracens? That's a big club. I
was there for less than a year, but I played Saracens first, of which I'm proud. I was playing at university. I played a bit, but I found that the standard was not quite high enough for what I needed to do. So I joined provincial champions in Sussex, a team called Lewis, who were the champions of that county. And I played there during my university years for Lewis, and then I played provincial for Sussex. I then went to work in Zimbabwe for a period of my life. I worked in Zimbabwe post 1980 UDI, ending of UDI, and I played for Mashonaland and Old Hararians. I played my one international when I was there against Italy. Then I came back to the UK play for Saracens. I think Saracens 7th, 5th, 4th. You have to go through the ranks there. It's not a name until I played in the merit table final. I played in the first against London Scottish. Also, obviously, very high standard indeed. So there's very much. And that was my last game of rugby. I had very serious injuries, knee injuries and other injuries in that particular match. And then came back, got involved in rugby here for a period. And then organized the Max Brito, which was absolutely massive. The Ivorian star who was paralyzed in the World Cup. And then I stopped, I left.
But the euphoria of the Max Brito project did not carry off into the Ghanaian mentality. You had 60,000 people at the stadium watching.
I hear even more, that's right.
They didn't understand.
That's true.
And yeah, it was a novelty event. Everybody just went to sleep after that.
As with most things here, they need to be carried. And after that, I didn't carry it, and other people playing it couldn't carry it. And so it kind of died. Don't forget, sports in Ghana in general suffered because of what happened in 1979. 1979, as you seek, depending on what your political philosophy is, if you try and see things as elitists, as opposed to that people are different, because you can look at rugby, cricket, hockey, and other sports as elitists, which is what part of the June 4th revolution looked at. But the fact of the matter is, not everybody can be a fast runner or a footballer. Some people can jump higher, some can ride horses, some can do different things. And that led to the breakdown of sports and sports development in Ghana. So school sports, competition-related matters, other related matters died. The legislative instruments, the LIs, which form the basis of where we have the NSA today, are a failure. They have no place in Ghana today. So sports and sports development is still stuck in time. We're 79, 80, 81, 82, 82, 85. That's where we are in sports development, which is why Ghana can't win anything or achieve anything outside of football, which today we can't achieve anything with that either. So when you take on a sport like rugby, or you want to see a sport develop properly, the challenges are massive. If you had now evolved and understood that sports development needed to move beyond the structures that were put in as a result of June 4th, we'd have a much better chance. The NSA is defunct. And therefore, the Ministry of Youth and Sports, whether it is the current minister, whether it's his predecessor, whether it's a predecessor before that, you are actually running what? Sword cutting? Announcing something else happening? Fighting with the minister for some budget so a football team can go somewhere? Surely anybody could do that. Your driver could do that. You need to put in proper structures so we get development. Structures that see the inclusion and infusion of capital and private funding back into sports. We have the lotteries in the UK. We have different methods in other parts of the world. So you can now start setting up centers of excellence like you have with Sports Australia, you have with Sports France. You can start picking people and say, wow, he could be a swimmer. Maybe genetically he could be something else. Something else, so that when we sit down and watch the Olympics, we're not waiting for Ghana to be knocked out early, or boxers who are not being treated well to come in overweight and improperly trained and to lose, and talk about the days of Roy Ankara and people in the 60s and 70s. You need a group of people who really understand what the development of everything is. What we do first and foremost as administrators is we engage in compliance. Why have we gone from an affiliate non-rugby playing nation to now full members of World Rugby within 3 years? The period we did it hasn't been done before. We therefore have to follow what World Rugby's program is, not our program. I've always believed that sevens is a way forward for Ghana. I really do. But if you want to play, we have had to establish a female rugby league, which we have. We've had to develop the 15s game. We're now having to develop an under-20 game. And we've gone from 0 to being seeded ahead of Togo and all the countries that have played rugby forever. We're now in East Africa, where we will do very badly on the under-20s, because we've literally in against big boys who've been playing 20 years. But at the senior level, we've brought in how our sports play today. Football, rugby, anything. There's a core way that sports is played. The discipline, the training, the nutrition, and the psychological makeup is what makes a sportsman. We've adopted that. Has everybody accepted it? As usual, no. But we do have a core of players who have, which is why we won 1D West Africa, and the senior national team is unbeaten in proper competitions in 2.5 years. Can you imagine, for a country that doesn't play rugby, we're seeded ahead of Nigeria, ahead of most of the countries. We're now got a number 12 seeding in Africa from nothing, without equipment, without support, without 1 penny from government, without 1 penny from the NSA, by running parallel programs, getting private businesses to see that the structure of leadership is worth investing in, because that's what you invest in. You invest in the structure of leadership, which is why at Kotoko we were able to bring sponsorship to football. You know, it doesn't come because the corporate world has nothing better to do with its money. You'll know from your days in New York. So you've got to put a structure that says, and is it enough? No. But it's enough for us to have companies like Pan-African, Komatsu, Sunda Group, Cleasoft, Twyford, GB Foods, and who do it with Gino Products, Pomo Products, Interplast, the great Hyson Factory, to be involved in this program. And recently we've had success with Société Générale, have invested in Ghana Rugby. So we must be doing something right. Whereas we're getting private sector, giving good optics and imagery, creating a pathway where private businesses can turn around and say, this makes sense for us to follow this group of people. We've got a Getting Into Rugby program where we are training children, school children. At the moment, we've got about 4,500 young school children.
At which level?
Kids, sub 10-year-old, 8-year-old, 6-year-olds.
So learning. They're playing touch rugby?
They're playing touch rugby. So not the physical contact stuff. They're playing them in schools. Can you imagine if the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Sports was to make it part of the national curriculum? Then we'd have 40,000 students being trained. And don't forget, rugby brings in a level of discipline that other sports don't. So discipline, teamwork, planning, strategy, which is why when you see rugby being played, you never see, despite the physicality of the game, you never see a player 2 meters tall, 130 kilos, going to a referee and sticking his hand like the footballers do, using expletives and swearing at referee. It doesn't happen in rugby. You see a monster putting his hand behind the back and listening to the referee whose decision is final. So we think it helps prepare students for the future. You see that the crime rate amongst people who play rugby globally is a lot less than those who play football.
Final words. Future of Ghana Rugby. In what is the time frame you've given yourself for Ghana to really emerge? You've given us a climb of where we are, but what is the target for you?
I think that I would have reworded it and said, how long do you intend to stay in rugby? Because as with most things, I believe there's a finite time. You take it, you develop it, you grow it. And I believe that if I can secure the kind of funding over the next year or so that rugby does not need a Herbert Mensah, then I hand over and give it to somebody else, which was our philosophy at Kotoko. I mean, by the year that I was removed, Kotoko had made an operating profit without any support. I mean, it's not like today that the minister gives them $150,000.
There's a contention about that, though. Sorry, you've taken us back there. If you talk to those in Kumasi, they say you left Kotoko heavily indebted.
No, that's not. It's simply, it depends who your friends are. Okay. Is that not the case? Because clearly, if you speak to the majority, it's not the case. Otherwise, nobody would want me back, right?
So you refute that particular?
Oh, it's not for me. I have nobody to impress. I owe nobody an explanation.
All right. Thank you very much, Herbert Mensah, for your time on Face to Face. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Hopefully, you will allow us back with a meal, in front of us as promised, cooked by yourself the next time Face to Face visits you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Not a problem.
And that is how we'll end this episode of Face to Face. My name is Godfred Akoto Boafo. Have a good day.